All right, so before today's podcast, I need to get something off my chest, right? Worked a long day, 12 hours. I'm okay with that. I'm an adult, go to work. But I order wings to go for dinner. Excited for these wings. I'm starving by the end of the day. I didn't get a lunch, whatever. Get in my car. I'm starving, right? Grab one of the wings, take a bite out of it. It is completely raw on the inside. So that's how my day's going. And we're back. I'm surprised we actually made it to 2 episodes, but we're back with another No Blue Line show. Thanks for listening. Braden Darnell, host of the No Blue Line show, with my co-host, who right now is absolutely nobody. So, totally planned on having a guest today after the Inter-Regional, RMU goaltender Paul Schreiber. But we had a little bit of a mix-up. He's also feeling a little bit under the weather. So we're going to just do the show with no guests, just me, solo. You get to hear my voice for another 45 minutes to an hour. We're going to go over the Inter-Regional. We're going to go over Division 1 and Division 3 of the Inter-Regional. Then we're going to look ahead this weekend. The ECRHA heads to ISCA in North Arlington. They got Division 1 and Division 2 action going on there. So we're going to preview the games there. I'm not sure if we're going to preview all the games. Not sure if we're going to have time for that. But we're going to preview some highlights, some games that I think are important. But first segment, we're getting into the Division 3 Inter-Regional that happened this weekend at Hotshots. So the D3 Regional at Hotshots, I watched the D3 games, particularly on Sunday. I paid a little bit more closer attention, which there were some really good Division 3 games, a couple good Division 3 games on Sunday. But Saturday, I really felt, I don't know, there weren't really that many surprises to me, I guess, in Division 3 at the Inter-Regional. Farmingdale ends up going 4-0. Farmingdale Green, Farmingdale Black did not attend. But Farmingdale Green comes out full roster. They go 4-0, like I said. They start off with Grand Valley State. They win 5-0. Not surprised by that. Daniel gets the shutout there. They score 5 goals, which isn't as many as they're scoring in the ECRHA, but they're still putting numbers up, man. And this team is really good. They're definitely, from what I've seen and from also what I've heard from a couple of their players, better than they were last year, which is a scary thing after they finished runner-up last year, heading back into this year. Second game in D3 ends up being Michigan State and Bethel. Again, not surprising for Michigan State to come out on top here 6-0. Michigan State always has a solid D3 team, just as they have in their D1 team. And Bethel's just, from what I've seen this weekend, not quite there. They weren't the worst team, I think, in Division 3 over the weekend, but certainly they weren't. Michigan State really dominated this game, in my opinion. They put up 29 shots as compared to Bethel's 19. It was really Michigan State from start to finish. Closer first period, Blake Costas actually only had the only first period goal for Michigan State. But after that, they put up 4 in the second, and they put up 1 more in the third. They really just controlled the play. Bethel took a lot of penalties. I believe it was something close to 5 or 6 penalties. Michigan State, I think, had 1. But Michigan State comes out on top of that one. And then we kind of get the matchup that we were waiting for in D3, similar to D1, that's Farmingdale-Lindenwood. And in this one, Farmingdale comes out on top Saturday evening. They come out on top 5-2. James Kolakathis has 2 goals. Daniel, you guys have heard me say Daniel's name, but I refuse to try to say Daniel's last name. So Daniel listens to it, one of the teammates listens to it, hit me up, let me know how to correctly pronounce it, because I don't want to sit here and sound like a complete schmuck messing up his last name. But he has 26 saves, 93 save percentage. The way that the game really went was it started off slow, kind of like a chess match. Farmingdale comes out. They score 10 minutes in on the power play off of a Jason Novak penalty. Holding call. Bobby Leitris ends up scoring on the power play. And something I do want to mention, and I know some of you guys might know, Bobby does some work for Coast to Coast. But one thing that I noticed completely of this Farmingdale team, and I've known this from playing against Bobby when Farmingdale was in D2 and playing against us at Penn State, But Bobby Leach is the type of player that he's going to stand in front of the net and he's going to piss you off to no end, and he's going to completely take any beating that you're going to give him, and then he's probably going to end up putting the puck in the back of the net or drawing a penalty. So, I mean, he's just a great addition to this D3 team. He has been playing on their top team this year. They have so much incredible talent on that D1 team that he's playing D3. He ends this game with 2 points. He also gets a penalty, but that's kind of expected, you know. If you're down in the crease taking a beating like that, then at some point, like, someone's going to hit you in the right spot, piss you off, you know, whatever. And that's what's going to happen. But Farmingdale scores in the first period. Bobby scores on the power play. And then they end up adding 2 more very early in the second. Kolakathis and Colin Tinshirt scores another one on the power play. Lindenwood, I mean, the game was back and forth. Farmingdale ends up capitalizing on those 2 power plays. Lindenwood then brings it back on a Frank Guida hooking call, or interference call, I think it was. I'm not sure because Frank got 2 penalties there late in the second. But Lindenwood brings it back. They're down 3-1 at the end of 2. And the game was pretty consistent. I mean, it was close the entire way through. And then you kind of saw a spark from Lindenwood to start the third. Chris Visico ends up scoring 15 seconds in right off the draw. And you're, all right, we're going to have a game here. You know, it's 3-2. And it continued playing that way back and forth. I think Farmingdale takes a penalty in the third. And then they successfully kill that off after Lindenwood starts putting shots on. Some great saves by Dan during that penalty kill. And then about at 8:28 in the third, Joe Mula again scores. I think that was his second goal of the game. I believe. No, it was his first goal of the game. First goal of the game. But Joe scores, puts Farmingdale up 4-2, and then from there, about a minute later, Kolakathis scores his second of the game, which pretty much put the seal on their victory. They're up 5-2 with 2.5 minutes left, 3 minutes left. And Farmingdale holds on, and I kind of expected this. I know a lot of my guys from the ECRHA listening to this might have expected this. Fans of Lindenwood or people that just don't really like the East Coast, which there are people out there, don't be surprised. They might not have expected this. They might have expected Lindenwood to come back and play a little bit harder, get the W. But I expected Farmingdale to come out. I've heard how they really prepared this year. They want to take the D3 National Championship this year, and I think this was the game they probably circled on their calendar as soon as they knew they were going to Hotshots. But D3 finishes it out. Lindenwood then has to go back and play Michigan State an hour after their game finishes with Farmingdale, and they pretty much just dominate Michigan State 8-1. So, I mean, that really shows that Farmingdale and Lindenwood pretty much are in a group of their own in D3 as far as you know, the Great Plains, Midwest, and East are concerned. With how much, I mean, they beat Michigan State by a combined score this weekend of 11-3, and I'll get into the Farmingdale Michigan State game because there's a little bit of fugazi going on at that game. But Lindenwood beats Michigan State 8-1. Bethel then beats Grand Valley. Grand Valley just wasn't a team, I think, that was prepared for the competition. I think this weekend probably helped them for the future, but I don't think they were prepared for the level of competition they were going to get this weekend. Sunday, the fugazi occurs. Farmingdale plays Michigan State. This was the first game that I saw. I was going back and forth between this one and Grand Valley RMU. They were playing at the same time on Sunday. And the way this goes down, Michigan State scores quick in the first. Andrew Ledwidge scores 2:34 in. And then Farmingdale answers right back. It was almost as if Farmingdale was kind of feeling Michigan State out. They weren't quite sure what to expect. But Farmingdale scores, levels it up 1-1. Then in the first period, you see Michigan State, Noah Leno, he takes 2 penalties at the same time. Excuse me, I'm stuttering. It's ridiculous. But he takes 2 penalties. Alex Flum takes another penalty. So that gives Farmingdale an extended 4-on-2, which this is something that I really noticed with Farmingdale's power play from a spectator's perspective, was that when they were on the power play 4-on-2, and then once Flum got out of the box, they were 4-on-3. Farmingdale possessed the puck, I want to say, for probably 3.5 minutes of this total 4 minutes. But they were passing around the perimeter. They had, whether it was Leitris or Kolakathis down low, just circling the goaltender, causing havoc down low. But shots were minimal. I mean, they had possession the entire time. They were trying to spread the defenders out, but the way that Michigan State played their kill was very efficient. In when they, I mean, I can speak more for when they had 3 guys on for the 2 minutes that it was a 4-on-3, but they kept their 3 guys in a very tight triangle, which basically when Farmingdale's looking from the point or from the wing and they see 3 guys in a tight triangle, you're not, what goes through your mind isn't that, oh, there's a lot of guys in front of the net, maybe I can get a bounce. What goes through your mind is, if I shoot this puck, it's going to get blocked. So I think Michigan State did an excellent job on the penalty kill throughout this game. They killed that off in the first, and then come back in the second, 47 seconds in, and Ledwidge scores his second goal of the game right quick, gives Michigan State the 2-1 lead. The game goes back and forth. This was a game that saw, I'd say, I mean, shots ended up being 38-22 in favor of Farmingdale, but I don't want to say that Farmingdale exactly controlled it that much. I'm not sure. I mean, it was really back and forth this game. It was a fun game to watch, very fun game to watch. But like I said, Michigan State goes up 2-1 heading into the third, and at the same time, early in the third, Brett Vinton takes a hooking call, and Farmingdale capitalizes. This was one where I don't exactly remember the goal particularly, because it is Wednesday now, but I believe it was a pass from the point to the low goal line area, which the goaltender Josh Lucas just wasn't ready for, and Kolakathis scores on that one, and that ties the game at 2 apiece. We go back and forth consistently throughout the next 3.5 minutes or so. Farmingdale then gets another break. It's on a rush, I believe it was a 3-on-2. Kolakathis scores his second goal of the game, gives them the lead with about 4.5 minutes to play, and then from there, this is where the fugaze starts to happen. Okay, there's a draw on the outside of the zone at the what would be the offsides mark if this were ice hockey, but outside of the zone, there's a false draw on Michigan State. The referee calls the play dead, has another draw. What happened in that draw was that a Michigan State player clearly closes his hand on the puck, moves it backwards, and not only just a hand pass fashion, but a delay of game fashion. The ref kind of gives him the benefit of the doubt, which surprises me, and calls a false draw, which then he warns them about it, explains it to them, about a 10-second ordeal, but, it seems as though the explanation is there. Next thing you know, same draw happens, the replacement draw happens, and the same exact situation occurs. The Michigan State center ends up going to the ground, going to a knee, closing his hand on the puck, and moving it backwards to ensure that he wins the faceoff. Immediately called dead. I'm not quite sure who was reffing this game. I'm really blanking on it. But calls play dead immediately, and you can hear from the stands, he verbally tells Blake Costas, who commits the delay game, he goes, man, I just explained to you, and it was pretty well known by Blake that he committed the crime, as they say, but the bench wasn't very happy about it, kind of up in arms at the situation, but that gives Farmingdale the power play, and then during the power play, Farmingdale has possession of the puck, and Michigan State, whether it's miscommunication or players not paying attention, coaches not paying attention, whatever it was, Michigan State then gets a too many men call with about 3 minutes left, and from there, Farmingdale has the 4-on-2. They end up not scoring on that, which was very well defended by Michigan State. But then, right as that time expires, on the power play, Bobby Leitris causing havoc in front, like I mentioned, and Michigan State player ends up giving him a little shot. Bobby goes down in a heap. Delayed call on Michigan State. Farmingdale has possession, and I didn't see what happened on the back end of the play. I only saw the aftermath of it, but there ends up being a little bit of a scuffle, and as the time expires, a little bit of a scuffle. Refs call the play. They end up calling the game because they felt the time expired. Players end up lining up for the handshake here. Farmingdale going up 3-2, winning the game. Players end up with the handshake line. They go through the entire line of handshakes. Michigan State coaches still going through, trying to get added time on the clock because they felt that there was more time on the clock than it being expired. Ends up that decided that 1.2 seconds get added to the clock, and they end up dropping the puck in the Farmingdale end because in the scuffle they gave Farmingdale a penalty. Ends up in Farmingdale's end. Jeff Tamburino ends up calling a timeout. Basically, what you tell your center there, I'm not sure if this is what he told him, but you basically fall on the draw. That's all you got to do. 1.2 seconds, you got to kill that clock. Draw, face-off happens. Nothing occurs from it. Farmingdale holds on, wins that game. Very exciting game to watch, although it was a little bit, like I said, a little bit fugazi. Exciting game to watch. Michigan State really played well. I felt like Farmingdale had more chances than they capitalized on, but still a really fun game nonetheless. And then finishing out D3, Farmingdale plays later on Sunday, beats Bethel 3-0. Really just controlled that game from start to finish. There wasn't really much to say about it. They outshot Bethel by 10, and they scored a goal in each period, which, wasn't necessarily a blowout. I mean, it was relatively close, but it was just one of those games where you could see that Farmingdale was controlling the pace, and when it's hard to beat a good team like that controls the pace. And Lindenwood beats Grand Valley 8-1 to finish Sunday off. No surprise there. Lindenwood and Farmingdale. Lindenwood's only loss was to Farmingdale. Farmingdale goes undefeated. I mean, pretty cut and dry there in Division III at the Inter-Regional. Division I, however, little bit different story. So Division I starts out, and I mentioned you get two great games right off the bat. Farmingdale, Michigan State, that game ends up going to overtime, which ends up seeing Jake Corso finish the game in overtime. Ends up being a 5-4 finish for Farmingdale. Farmingdale controlled this game, but it was almost as if there was no urgency to put the puck in the back of the net. Michigan State's goaltender, Rob Kowalczyk, did play well. He ends up with 27 saves, but it really was just a matter of Farmingdale not finishing, in my opinion, from watching. But it was a great game nonetheless. Michigan State's competitive, and they showed that they can compete with some great teams. Lindenwood on the other end, they play Westchester. They end up stomping Westchester 10-1. Really added for something interesting later on, with Lindenwood really flexing their muscles against the number 2 team in the standings in the East. Going through, UMass ends up beating Rowan at 10 o'clock, 13-0. Not really surprised. Rowan really disappointing this year, but big win for UMass. UMass ends up getting a lot of confidence off of that one. They've got a big game against Lindenwood later in the day. Scoring 13 goals is nothing to joke around about, even against a lower echelon team. So UMass gets a big win there. Bethel and Slippery Rock, and I'll tell you, man, Bethel ends up winning this one 6-1. Bethel always plays that box. The game was really close. Shots 29-23. Only goal for Slippery Rock was scored by Braden White on the power play, and Bethel spread their goals out accordingly. A couple penalties here and there. Pretty much just a standard game. Bethel's box really does screw with teams, and you'll hear about that when I talk about them playing Farmingdale. But, Slippery Rock was just... I'll get into Slippery Rock. I don't really want to get into Slippery Rock right now, but I do have some things to say because I know I hyped them up in the last podcast, but I'll get into that after I talk about their last game against Lindenwood, what they finished off. But just going down the schedule here, Western Michigan ends up beating Cortland 4-3 in overtime, which was a bit of a surprise to me. Cortland is in that second tier of ECRHA teams that I kind of talked about. A win against an out-of-conference rival, or not an out-of-conference rival, but an out-of-conference opponent would have been big for their confidence. Even though Western Michigan, I believe they have 2 wins so far over in the Midwest or the Great Plains, but any win is a good win if you're a team that's in the hunt and looking for that momentum going forward. So overtime loss kind of deflating for Cortland, I think. I think their results further on in the weekend kind of show that. Grand Valley ends up coming out and beating Newman 6-3 in the start of the weekend. I know you guys heard my opinion on Newman heading in without Tyler Kraft. Tyler did play for Farmingdale. It is official. He will be playing for Farmingdale in the spring, so that scuttlebutt that I heard was true, which really isn't a surprise to me. But Newman ends up losing 6-3, and, I want to be clear. I know I talked about Newman a little bit on the last podcast, but in my personal opinion of watching, and, like I said, this podcast is my opinion. This has no affiliation with whether it be Coast to Coast, whether it be the ECRHA, nothing at all. This is a standalone podcast, completely subjective, and that's why I invite you guys to come in and give your opinions, whether you're players, coaches, families, alumni, anyone's welcome. I've got a couple people lined up, like today. Paul just didn't work out. But anyways, I mentioned Newman and how I think that they're gonna be very underwhelming in the spring, and I don't think that's just because of the loss of Tyler. I think this is kind of not a long time coming, but a year and a half, 2 years. Newman was competitive last year with Shane Fox, Tyler, Andy Zubak. They were very competitive, but they just didn't have that edge about them. Maybe it was that Farmingdale was just that much better, but Newman just didn't have. They weren't the Newman that we've come to know the last 4 or 5 years, and I think they've just declined even just a little bit more this year. And then losing Tyler Kraft is just like the icing on the cake. So I think they significantly dropped down. I know coast-to-coast rankings reflect that, but I wouldn't take too much into the rankings. I mean, rankings are just rankings, just like every other sport. But Newman does lose to Grand Valley 6-3. On the flip side of that, at noon, Florida Gulf Coast beat Rhode Island 15-3. Rhode Island, a team that struggled, surprised a little bit later, but just another team that's struggling. They travel to Hotshots with 5 guys, and Division I with 5 guys, it doesn't matter who you're playing, it's going to be a struggle. But 1 o'clock, Temple beats Western Michigan 6-5. Close game, very close game, back and forth. Not really surprised that Temple gets the win, although at the time I wasn't surprised, but then seeing how they kind of played later in the weekend, I was a little bit surprised. But going ahead, Lindenwood then ends up stomping UMass. UMass had that momentum-building win against Rowan, but I think Lindenwood is just on that next level that UMass needs to get to if they want to compete for a national championship this year, and they're just not there yet. I mean, everyone knows Lindenwood is a very special breed of team in school, so nothing really surprising there. After this game, on the opposite rank, Florida Gulf Coast beats Rowan 4-3 in overtime. Rowan, who gets smacked by UMass early in the morning, comes back to a Florida Gulf Coast team who just smacked Rhode Island, and they take them to overtime. So it's really hard for me to tell, really, one, where Rowan's at. Maybe the UMass game was a little bit of a fluke. Maybe they still had some travel legs. Maybe Florida Gulf Coast just isn't that great. It's hard for me to really get a read on that game. But also at 2 o'clock, Bethel ends up beating Westchester. So Westchester starts off 0-2, which is pretty disappointing. But I think it's just that damn box that Bethel plays. And I know, in my playing days, playing teams with a box, it was just annoying. There's never really clear-cut lanes if they're disciplined about it. There's never clear-cut lanes, even if you know you're the better team. You're forcing shots to the outside, and it's just a battle to get those goals. And I think with Westchester and their offense really circulating around Derek Hoffman, I think that really hurt them in this instance. Grand Valley beats Temple 6-1. Grand Valley played well, I think, this weekend. They had a fortunate schedule, I think. I think they played their hardest game first against Newman. And then getting that win, I think every other game was pretty much, not a gimme, but I think that gave them extra confidence heading into their later games. Michigan State beats Newman by 1. 6-5 Saturday afternoon. Robert Morris ends up beating Western Michigan. So at this point, you've got UMass who throttles Rowan. You've got Robert Morris who beats Western Michigan, and you've got Temple who beats Western Michigan. And I know I made a big point on the podcast last week about these Tier 2 teams getting good starts to their spring, how it can really propel them forward. And this is another instance where I think Robert Morris really can build off of that. And I'm going to talk about their game against Grand Valley in a little bit that I think can propel them even more, although they did get the loss in that game. Bethel beats UMass 6-1, kind of expected. UMass Bethel's just that step up above UMass. I think game of the weekend, everyone was coming to watch. A lot of people that I talked to said that this was probably one of the best games that they've ever seen of roller hockey. Lindenwood Farmingdale D1 action. Lindenwood, the game goes back and forth, and this game was hyped up. It still had a very different feel to it than like a Nationals, obviously, but Lindenwood comes out, scores 10 minutes in. Daniel Ross, assisted by Steve Farina. Steve, an incredible player, as everyone knows. They end up scoring first. They also have the shot advantage 7-5 in the first, but a very back and forth game. Some big saves by Jake Robinson, and if without Jake Robinson, Lindenwood loses this game hands down. I believe that with everything in me. I don't think Lindenwood wins this game without Jake and net. Second period comes by. Matthew O'Shaughnessy, he's been with Farmingdale from the get-go, I think, of the program. A player like Leitris in D3, who's just a player that's out there to find holes in the defense, and then while he's down there, really piss you off. And he does a great job of it. I'm not knocking his play style or anything like that. He's pissed me off plenty of times on occasion, and he continues to do it, and he continues to see success from it. So props to him. He scores early in the second, 3:31, assisted by Russolello. The teams go back and forth. Jake Robinson makes some saves that are just absolutely unheard of. Keeps Lindenwood in this game. And then early in the third, O'Shaughnessy, who sometimes knows how to push that button, push that edge just a little bit too far, he ends up taking a hooking call early in the third, and Adam Swims capitalizes on it for Lindenwood, puts them up 2-1 early in the third. Teams go back and forth again. Lindenwood actually ends up taking a penalty, putting Farmingdale on the power play, but Farmingdale just can't solve Robinson. Lindenwood goes home with the 2-1 win. Like I said, easily game of the weekend as expected. These two teams, I expect these two teams to meet again. I'm really kind of hoping they don't end up on the same side of the bracket at Nationals, but you know, what happens, and whenever these two teams do meet again, it's going to be a fantastic game. Finishing Saturday off, Grand Valley beats Slippery Rock 8-3. Slippery Rock's woes, Slippery Rock, I'll get into Slippery Rock right now. Slippery Rock loses this one 8-3. Then on Sunday, they lose to Lindenwood 7-2. And Slippery Rock, I talked them up in the last podcast. They're a young team, back in Division 1 this year after a break last year. Bunch of new faces, new goaltender, Ian Frere, and new faces. And they really disappointed me this weekend. They had some games that I think they easily could have won, that being their games on Saturday against Bethel and Grand Valley, and that could have really made a statement for that team. Could have really made a statement, and the fact is that they just didn't do it. Lindenwood game ends up being 7-2, but I'll tell you, that score, 5 goals isn't a small lead, but I'll tell you, it wasn't that close. Lindenwood jumped out to an early lead. They extended that early lead, and they cruised from there. So we keep moving on to Sunday. Michigan State beats UMass 5-1. Florida Gulf Coast beats Cortland 7-4. Again, games kind of expected, going as expected. Shocker of the week, well, not shocker of the weekend, but Rhode Island ends up getting a big win against Michigan State. Rhode Island pretty much, kind of looks like they're out of it in the East, but this is a group of dedicated hockey players, man. They come down to Hotshots from Rhode Island to Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania. It's a long-ass drive. They come down with 5 guys, end up beating a Western Michigan team. If I'm Western Michigan, that really pisses me off. It really is disappointing. I'm looking at myself and my teammates like, how the fuck did we just let that happen? But Rhode Island comes down, and that's a big win for them. 7-5, I'm really happy for those guys because playing with 5 guys sucks to begin with, let alone when throughout the year you've been just getting the hell beat out of you, and then you get that win. That's a good win. Lindenwood beats Newman 6-0. This game did not have the feel of Lindenwood-Newman that it's had in the past, and I think it has to do with what I talked about earlier. Lindenwood controls it from start to finish. Grand Valley ends up beating Robert Morris 7-4. This game was a lot closer than 7-4 indicated. Grand Valley, these two teams, you really saw the differences in their play styles. Grand Valley plays a more orchestrated, professional-type schematic, systematic approach. Robert Morris really tries to capitalize on turnovers. They play up and down, fast pace, which is what's good for them right now without Dan Trunk, because with Dan Trunk, they're a completely different team. I think they play a lot slower. But without him, they kind of rely on that run and gun. This game ends up getting tied late by Grand Valley at the 10-10 mark. Garrett Polish ends up scoring that goal. This game gets tied by Robert Morris. Robert Morris scored 2 goals in a minute and a half's time. And then Grand Valley takes the lead at the 10-10 mark. Then they score again 40 seconds later. And I believe it was the goal at the 10-10 mark. The goal. I wish that Paul could have joined the podcast because I don't remember which goal it was. But there's a play where a Grand Valley player. No, a Robert Morris player. I'm sorry. Robert Morris player loses his stick. Grand Valley player seemingly kind of takes him down. I didn't see the play myself. I was watching Farmingdale, Michigan State D3 at the time, which, as I said, had a little bit of fugazi in it itself. But Robert Morris player ends up going down. Second Grand Valley player ends up picking up the puck and going top shelf on Schreiber. Ends up giving them the lead. I believe it was the goal that gave them the lead. It might have been the tying goal, but gives them the lead nevertheless. And then Grand Valley adds 2 more on top of it at 10:57, 11:14. And at that point, after that play that the entire Robert Morris fan base, parents, and team pretty much felt was a penalty, that pretty much deflated them. And then Grand Valley ends up scoring some insurance markers after that just to kind of pad the stats. McIntyre scores both of them. McIntyre ends up finishing with a pretty good game, 4 goals, 2 assists. I mean, I say pretty good, but that's a great game. But Robert Morris, I don't think Robert Morris should hold their heads down for this. I think the win against Western Michigan, although Western Michigan proved to be a lesser opponent by losing to Rhode Island, I think they got to realize that they can play with these teams. Grand Valley's a good team. They played with them for all but 2 minutes of the game. And that's just what it comes down to. They can play with good teams. They should have the confidence to play with good teams. And I think they should continue that moving forward. They play games here in ISCA coming this weekend. We're going to preview those games. But I think Robert Morris is a team that, they could get that momentum. Or, if they don't come out and play their best, they don't play inspired, then they're just going to keep getting beaten. And as a team, it's really hard as a player on a team and as a spectator of a team to see a team that's just defeating themselves by whether it's not caring, having no intensity or whatever. So I really hope Robert Morris, doesn't come out with no intensity. I hope they still strive to finish off the season well, because there are possibilities for that team to get some upsets and have a lot of fun for the rest of the year. But then Westchester ends up losing to Michigan State 3-2. Westchester had a really tough weekend this weekend, and one thing that I really noticed is how that offense circulates around Derek Hoffman. They just don't really have the depth that it takes to compete with these really big, deeper teams like Michigan State, Lindenwood, and Farmingdale, and it really showed this weekend, I felt. Whitman played outstanding as usual. Continuing on, Florida Gulf Coast ends up beating Temple 9-0. This is that game that I said Temple they just looked flat. I don't know. This was their first game on Sunday. Maybe, obviously I don't know what, their arrangements were for the weekend, but maybe, something came up and they came out flat-footed against Florida Gulf Coast. Florida Gulf Coast made them play. And Florida Gulf Coast is a team that can score goals, man. You can't sleep on these guys, because although they did lose this weekend, they still put up, 15-9 in 2 games? Like, those are some absurd numbers. Grand Valley comes back after their win against Robert Morris, puts down Cortland 5-1. Pretty much controlled that game from start to finish. Farmingdale ends up beating Bethel 3-2 in overtime, and guys, I'll tell you, this game was only 3-2 in overtime because of Bethel's box, and I'm not kidding about this. I'm not saying it because it's Farmingdale. I'm not saying it because I'm from the East. This was 3-2 because of Bethel's box. And Farmingdale pretty much seemed uninspired as well. They didn't have that intensity, and Farmingdale's a team that brings intensity to big games at regionals, nationals. They bring that intensity, that excitement, that motivation in those big games. And I don't know if because this was their last game of the weekend, they just didn't have that fire, but they didn't. And Bethel's box also made it close. Farmingdale ends up winning 3-2 in overtime nonetheless. And also, Western Michigan beats Rowan 5-2. Not much really to talk about there. I don't think either of these teams, by watching them, are a big threat to the top team. So Western Michigan ends up getting some good wins throughout the weekend. They lose to Robert Morris. They lose to Rhode Island. So, they're really 50-50. I didn't watch them play personally. I didn't hear much scuttlebutt about them. But they have potential. Everyone has potential. D1, aside from Farmingdale and Lindenwood, I feel, is a wide open division that, if you come in with the right mindset, you can pretty much beat any team, in my opinion. But with that said, we're going to roll right into the preview this weekend. Only one big episode this weekend instead of two separate ones. But we're going to roll right into ISCA weekend. You got D1, D2, D3 action, all going down at ISCA Saturday and Sunday. And there's going to be some good games, really. There's going to be some games that really tell how the spring is going to pan out. We're going to look at Division 3 first, and basically, to be completely honest, because I feel like Division 3 has the least to talk about. So I'm going to run through it quick. No hate to my guys in D3. There's a lot of guys that I respect as players, a lot of programs that I respect in Division 3. But watching Farmingdale Green this past weekend, I don't know who can compete with them until I see something different in person on a scoreboard or hear something different from someone else. These guys are a monster in Division 3 in the East Coast, and I expect that to stay the same. They start out the weekend at 7 o'clock against Temple. No questions to me. I think Farmingdale still needs to take these games all as serious as possible, because if they start slacking off now, it's going to show off in the games that matter, and that's not a good formula to have. I don't think that they're going to end up slacking, but I think it's important to remember that. On the flip side, after that game, Slippery Rock D3 ends up playing Farmingdale Black. I think this game can be competitive, but I think Farmingdale Black ends up coming out with the W. Slippery Rock D3 does not have the firepower that Farmingdale has as a core group. They also don't have the depth that Farmingdale has. Farmingdale has two Division 3 teams and a Division 4 team. This school has depth, and I think that even their second D3 team can beat Slippery Rock in this game. Going ahead, you got Farmingdale Green coming back against Farmingdale Black at 11 in the morning. Farmingdale Green, I think, takes this one. This is actually the closest ECRH game that Farmingdale Green has had is against their sister team, Farmingdale Black. But I still think they take it. I mean, what can I feel like a broken record. This team is the real deal. They're out here to win nationals, and I just don't see much going forward for them. They play Slippery Rock again Saturday night. I think same story. I think they're too much for Slippery Rock. Farmingdale Black plays Temple. Again, I feel a little bad kind of talking about Farmingdale, but that's just how D3 is right now. I want another team to prove me otherwise. I want someone to hold Farmingdale Green to under 10 goals a game in the East. I want someone to beat Farmingdale Black other than Farmingdale Green. Someone do it, because I want to see it and I want to talk about it. But until it's done, what do you want me to say? It's crazy. But Sunday, Slippery Rock Temple, the only D3 game of the weekend. And, this actually could be a good game, I guess. Slippery Rock 1-4-1. Temple 0-7. I kind of talked about how Temple just doesn't have a lot going for them. They're almost giving up 10 goals a game. But, new semester, new story. They get this winning at Slippery Rock, and guess what? They're only 1 point behind Slippery Rock in the standings. So you never know. I mean, the Temple guys just have to come out and, play their game, play smart, play discipline, play as fast as they can, play as smart as they can. And, you never know what can happen. I mean, they've got Christian Schnitzler, who's got 4 goals and no assists. He has double the next person in their team in points. So Temple's just got to come out firing. But we're going to transition over to Division 2, which, like I've said before, I think is one of the most competitive, arguably the most competitive all-around division in the ECRHA and the NCRHA. But you've got, I think there's 4 teams in Division 2 going to ISCA this weekend. So good rotation of games, good chance for guys to get some consistent games throughout the week and get those legs back under them and get some good wins heading further in. So you're going to have to excuse me getting a little dry mouth here, solo podcasting. But to start D2, Hofstra ends up playing Syracuse first, 1 o'clock. I see Hofstra taking this one, although I wouldn't be surprised if Syracuse pulls an upset and takes them. They've got firepower. Anthony Bellman is a great player. He's pretty much, him and Ken O'Brien are my two favorite players to watch on Syracuse. I felt that way last year whenever they were in D4, and I still feel that way this year. That's no disrespect to the other guys on Syracuse, but these guys are the real deal. They can shoot the puck, they can skate, they can slow the play down, they can speed it up, whichever they want to do. But Hofstra's got some firepower that Syracuse is going to have to learn how to fend off. And in order to get Bellman and O'Brien free, they're going to have to, at the same time, stop guys such as Nigel Grove, Colin Ewald, and Andrew Gannon, who all three have over 30 points, and all three have more points than Bellman, who's Syracuse's top goal scorer. So it's going to be a tough task for Syracuse. I think Hofstra wins this as expected. But Syracuse has a chance. I really think they do. It's just a matter of playing smart, disciplined defense first and capitalizing on missed opportunities from Hofstra, turning the game around and coming back at it. Second D2 game of the weekend going to end up being Hofstra coming back at it Saturday evening against Oswego. Another game I think that can be close. These two teams are pretty close in the standings. Oswego, as you guys know, last year, and even coming into this year, I've been a full supporter of the Lake Show. So I'm hoping that they can, do well this spring, make some noise, make another run like they did last year with the Tafalos brothers and Joey DeMarco and Louis DeMarco and Paula Fairmont. I mean, these guys have the talent to be a good team. I'm just not sure what they're missing. They have the potential to beat good teams, but right now they're sitting at 5-6, right under that bubble, and they need to ramp up their play, man. And I know that they're possible of doing it. I'm gonna take Oswego in this game. I think Hofstra. I'm gonna flip flop. I think Hofstra beats Syracuse earlier in the day, but then I think Oswego beats Hofstra in this game. I just really want to see Oswego do well. I know they have the potential to do so, and I want to see it for the team of Oswego, because those guys put in work every single year to, one, keep their program alive, and two, keep it competitive. So I want to see it come together for them. And then D2 finishes out on Saturday night, Oswego against Syracuse. And again, I'm going to take Oswego because I think they have more depth than Syracuse. I see that game being close, and by close, I mean 3 to 4 goals. D2, Sunday, Yeshiva comes to town, and I think Yeshiva wins all 3 of their games. They play Oswego first, then Syracuse, then Hofstra. I think Yeshiva is a team. Yeshiva is probably one of 2 teams, I think, that can compete with Northeastern. And I think it's going to show in their games on Sunday. They play 3 games in 5 hours, running the gauntlet as they always do, and I think they go 3-0. They beat Oswego, they beat Syracuse, they beat Hofstra, catapults them up into second in the standings throughout the weekend. Going to be a good weekend for Yeshiva, I think. So then we go to D1. More games in D1, more teams coming to town. D1 starts off with SRU and Massachusetts, and I know that I said how disappointing SRU was at Hotshots, and they need to prove themselves in this game against UMass. UMass was putting up goals at Hotshots in Syracuse, SRU just wasn't. SRU just was not putting up goals, and I know that they're capable of doing it. I've seen it in person. I've seen these guys play for years. I know they're capable of doing it. It's just a matter of slowing the game down, and then when the opportunity presents itself, playing that run and gun that they love to play. They need to slow the game down, maybe learn the thing from when they played Lindenwood or Michigan State or Bethel this past weekend. Slow the game down and then ramp it up. And I know Christian Scott's coaching those guys, and he knows he was a part of the SRU team that went far in D2 Nationals, went far in D1 Nationals. He was a part of the core group of SRU guys, and I know that he's giving these guys good quality. Christian would be a great guy to have on the podcast. Christian, if you're listening, hit my line. But I know he's teaching these guys the right thing about competitive college roller hockey. It's just a matter of it being executed is really all it comes down to. After that game, Farmingdale plays Robert Morris. Poor Robert Morris has an okay weekend, a little bit of momentum, upsetting game against Grand Valley. Then they got to come in and play Farmingdale. I think you guys know my prediction for that game. Farmingdale's going to, I believe, win that one. Then Robert Morris gets to come back, play Rhode Island. Good for Robert Morris. I think Robert Morris gets the win in that one. Although I wouldn't take Rhode Island lightly. I repeat, Dan Trunk, I would not take Rhode Island lightly because Rhode Island has a win under their belt against Western Michigan, and guess what? That's the only team you beat at the Inter-Regional. So come into this game firing. I don't care if you lose by 20 against Farmingdale. Come against Rhode Island because you need to win that game to stay competitive. After that, Temple and UMass. This game, I think, can go really either way, depending on UMass's energy after the SRU game, their mentality after the SRU game. Really, I think this game's a toss-up. I'm uncomfortable even making a prediction on this one. But I'll predict UMass beats Temple, stays above them in the standings. Temple just didn't look that great against Florida Gulf Coast last past weekend, and I'm hoping that's not hung over into this weekend. Maybe they come out and surprise me. I'm not sure. But SRU then gets a shot at Farmingdale Saturday afternoon, and this is SRU's chance. They had their chance for me, and I gassed them up. I gave them some good gas, told you how much potential I felt that they had. Well, this is it. This is their chance right here. Farmingdale, 4 p.m., ISCA, North Arlington, New Jersey. Their chance to really say, hey, we're here to compete. We're going to do it. We're not these young guns. We're not undisciplined. We have the ability to compete with the best teams, and this is how you do it. Beating Farmingdale the week after an Inter-Regional that you disappointed, and Farmingdale didn't really disappoint, but I don't think Farmingdale played their greatest. That's how you do it. I think Farmingdale wins, but I would really love to see Slippery Rock win for the competitiveness of the entirety of Division I. After that, Temple gets Farmingdale at 7 o'clock. I think Farmingdale wins that one. Not really a surprise there. Slippery Rock then gets to play Rhode Island, and I said this to RMU. I'm going to say it to SRU. Don't take Rhode Island lightly, because a loss to Rhode Island not only makes you the laughingstock of the entire division, but it's going to end up hurting you come March. I guarantee you that. Robert Morris then gets to play Temple. This is a huge game for both of these teams, not only for head-to-head in the standings, but these two teams are close. They want to get that momentum heading forward into the rest of the year. This is a big game for both Robert Morris and Temple. I think that Temple comes out on top of that one. Division I heading into Sunday, SRU going to end up playing Temple, and this one I think is going to be a cruise for SRU. I think they match up well against Temple. I think they end up beating Temple by a handful of goals, and depending on, this game really can define SRU heading forward, depending on how they do against Farmingdale and against Rhode Island. It's Farmingdale and Rhode Island. This really could be the telltale sign of if, in my personal opinion, I drop Slippery Rock down to that tier 2, or if I keep them right on that bubble, right on that competing with Newman for that kind of 4 spot in the East. This is the game right here, SRU and Temple, that I think that happens. And then last game of D1 action, UMass, Robert Morris. Robert Morris has the cards stacked against them right now. Their play, Farmingdale to start off. Then they get a little bit easier, but they can't take lightly Rhode Island. Then they have 2 games that can really define the rest of their spring semester. And that's UMass and Temple. Temple Saturday night, UMass Sunday morning, early afternoon. I think UMass wins this game, but because of my real yearning to have Paul on this podcast, I want to say to Robert Morris, go out there. Although you lost to UMass 2-6 in Feasterville at preseason, that game doesn't mean anything. This game means something, and this game actually means a lot for you because to be honest, you don't have that many games left after this. You only have 1 weekend left after this ISCA weekend for Robert Morris. You need to get wins this weekend, and you need to move yourself up in the standings so that you don't end up being the team, you end up being known as the team above Rhode Island, because that's not really that great either. But that's going to do it, guys. Second episode of the No Blue Line Show. We're cruising right along. I'm hoping that this episode gets received as well as the first episode did. I want to thank you guys for all the love and support on that first episode. It was just okay to me. I want to give you guys better quality content than that, and I'm a little bit nervous for how this one's going to turn out and be received, but we're doing our best. Gave you guys a preview of the gave you guys a recap of the Inter-Regional and a little preview of ISCA. Next week, expect Paul and possibly another guest, a little bit of a roundtable talk. Next weekend, we're recapping ISCA and previewing Massachusetts for the East Coast. And that's going to do it for the No Blue Line Show, Episode 2. I want to thank my boy Cartoon Ready 91 for the incredible graphic. I want to thank you guys for listening. We are out of here.